Hello, my name is Audrey Gordon, and I'd like to welcome you to day 18 of the Dataverse Advent Calendar. Rasika is coming back today. I hope you saw her first video about creating Canvas apps, but today she's going to talk to us about calling Dataverse from Power Automate. And she's packed this with great tips that you can use in the Power Automate Studio. Just a reminder, in case you didn't see her first video, Rasika has been working in the Power Platform since the product was in preview. She has spent extensive time doing product adoption and evangelism by educating and supporting users as they adopt the Power Platform services. Her direct exposure to working with end users has given her insights on customer pain points and product improvement areas. She is currently working as a senior PM with the business applications vertical, using her customer insights to make the product better. So I'll turn it over to Rasika. Happy holidays and do enjoy.
Hello all, welcome back to the 25 Days in Dataverse series. My name is Rasika, and today I am going to guide you through different ways of connecting to Dataverse from Power Automate. Well, we all know that in order to perform CRUD operations, Microsoft has provided with out-of-box Microsoft Dataverse connector. Today in this session, I am going to discuss some tips and tricks of how to use out-of-box connector in the most efficient way and some alternate ways to connect to the Dataverse services. For tips and tricks, I am going to use one of the most commonly used actions, which is list rows. When you select a particular action, the Microsoft Dataverse connector connects to the tables in the current environment. That means it will only list the tables in the environment in which you are making your flow. For demo purpose, I am going to use users table here. Now, if you click on show advanced options, you see a lot of parameters that you can set in order to make your flow more optimized and robust. To begin with, I'll just go ahead and set row count to 1. And what this is doing is that it's getting top 1 row from the Dataverse table. When I click on test and save and run this particular flow, it will go through the users table and get top 1 record from this particular table. Now, if you click on list rows and click on download, you see the action output, and you can see how big the output is, which means for just one particular record, this is the amount of data that you are getting within the flow. Is it really optimized? Probably not. So how to further optimize and get the results that we really want? So if you click on edit here, the first thing is the select column parameter lets you define the columns that you really want to get in your flow. These are the columns which means importance to you and you are going to use further in that. So in my demo, I am going to use the columns such as full name and address and city of the user. Now consider this. I don't want all the users in my table to be listed. I want my flow to only get the users for whom the full name is Rasika. So I go ahead and add the filter in the filter. The filter rows use OData queries as the format. So in order to get the OData queries, you can use references for OData where these parameters like equal to, contains, and so on and so forth can be used to filter your data at the server side, which means that you are only getting relevant data to your flows. Once I do that and click on test, now this time, if you see the output of this particular action, you can see that the amount of data that is coming into your flow is way less. So if I click on list rows and click on download, this time this is the output that I have, and the flow executed pretty fast. So this is the difference, the first difference between the amount of data that you get into the flow and how efficient it can make your flow. The next thing is you can use sort by column, sort by filter to actually sort the data in a particular order. So if I say full name in ascending or descending order, I can organize my data. The other thing is expand query. So suppose In my users, I have a column called transaction currency ID. So if I quickly look at my users table, you can see that the column currency, so let me go there. So currency, which is named as transaction currency, is a lookup column, and it is a many to one relationship to the currency table. So what I'm going to do is that if I just go ahead and get the currency ID without getting the actual value, the currency ID will look something like this. The transaction currency ID value, which is a GUID, but I really want the value, the display name formatted value, which is US dollar. So in order to do that, you can use expand query to do a lookup on the transaction currency column and then get the actual name. So to do that, I'm going to use the expand query and going to write this down. So this is my column name, and now from the reference I'm going to get the actual currency name. When I do that and click on test, so once it saves, we can really see the output here. And this time you see it lists the transaction currency ID and the columns that I'm interested in. So I did get my currency name as US dollar, which I can use later in my flow. The other aspect is that you can use Fetch XML query. So Fetch XML query can really help optimize your flows and write dynamic queries. Now consider this: when you go to the organization and get the advanced option here, if you want to use any system views or user safe views and click on download Fetch XML, then use this Fetch XML in this particular column right here, put a Fetch XML query, and now when I run this, I'm going to remove the above parameters. So what I'm going to do is that from the system user entity, I am going to get some of the attributes, and I have applied some filter where I'm saying that is disabled attribute is equal to false and some other modes are equal to some values. Now when I go ahead and run these, you can see that you can actually run an enhanced query in the form of Fetch XML. So when I run this, you get the data. So what I wanted to highlight here is that it's very important to understand what you really need from the flow when you make a particular query, and get only the relevant data from the server side. The less data, the most relevant data you get, the more optimal your flow is. Now this is about the list rows, and again, as I mentioned earlier, the Microsoft Dataverse connector only connects to the current environment in which you are building your flow. Are there any other ways that you can connect to Dataverse service? What about you want to do something which is beyond the parameters that we have already given? In that case, you can use another action called HTTP with Azure AD. So when you select for this action, you can select invoke an HTTP request. If you go to the three dots and click on add new connection, it asks you to specify the base URL and Azure AD resource URI. Now this is where it gets interesting. This particular action allows you to connect to a Dataverse tables in a different environment. In my case, if I go to Admin Center here, and suppose if I want to go to a different environment and from there I want to get some queries or some data, all I need to do is that get the actual organization URI for that particular environment. So in my case, suppose I'm going to select a different one, and for this guy I'm going to copy the environment URL right here, go to my flow, given the organization URL for both the base as well as the Azure AD, click on sign in. It uses the Azure AD for authentication, so as long as you have access to that particular environment, you will be able to connect. So this is the connection to a different environment. via the invoke HTTP request. As simple as it is. Now you click on get, and now this time you can refer to the web API documentation and make any REST API call that the Dataverse allows. To give you a brief about how this looks like, here is the documentation which you can use to refer to Microsoft Dataverse REST APIs. I'll share that in the link. So how to actually call a REST API from HTTP Dataverse? So here is how a REST API looks like. So I'm going to call the organization ID, which is right here, which is a different organization ID from the current environment. And this time I'm going to get the saved queries. Now know that the Dataverse out-of-box connector does not give you a way to actually get a particular saved query. So if you want, you can make this API call, click on test, save and test, and this time you get the output from the saved queries table. And there you go. So once this invoke an HTTP request action runs, you will be able to see the saved queries for a particular system query. So basically this is giving me the query metadata of the enabled user saved query. Now from this I can use the saved query ID and move further. The other thing, the next step after using an invoke an HTTP request is to copy the output so that you can parse the value and use parse JSON to format the data from the above step. So generate from sample, paste the JSON, click on done, and this is nothing but the value. So there you go. Once you do that, you are actually formatting the incoming array and getting the data out. Okay, the next step is that once you have the data, you can further work in order to make some queries. And this is when I said that while our out-of-box connector can help you get some data, metadata about saved query ID, there are things that you cannot do. And with API, you can do basically everything that the Dataverse API allows. Generally, what I do is that if I were to create another action, so now new step. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to click on copy to my clipboard, and if I go to my clipboard, I can just make a copy of the previous action. So here you can see that it exactly copied what I have written in the previous step, and this time I'm going to change the API query to this one. So basically what I'm saying is that I got the saved query ID for the enabled user, and based on the saved query ID, I want to retrieve the data from the system users. So what I'm exactly doing is that I'm directly executing a saved query or a user query from the flow. So this time when I click on test, and the flow executes, and you can actually now execute a system or a saved user query from the flow where the API invoke an HTTP request, and you can connect to a different environment. Now, is there any other way to do it? There is, and those are called custom connectors. Now, some people may feel that custom connectors are a bit complex, but really they are not, and I'm going to show that how quickly you can create a custom connector. In order to create a custom connector, you need to log into portal.azure.com and go to Azure Active Directory. Under Azure Active Directory, you need to go to app registrations, click on new registration, give the name of the application. So in my case, I'm going to give demo Dataverse app. Select account in this organization only because I want the users to be AD authenticated, and click on register. Once you do that, in the overview, you get an application ID. So let's make a note of it. So in my case, I'm going to make the note of the application ID like this. And the next thing is authentication. Basically, what we are trying to say is that when the user authenticates, what is the endpoint that is actually going to take that authentication and authenticate the user. With Microsoft APIs, generally there are 3 particular endpoints that can be added, and one of the 3 endpoints can take care of the authentication. So I am going to quickly add those 3 endpoints right now. So we click on, so I moved a little too fast. So click on platform configurations under authentication. Click on add a platform, select web, add some redirect UIs. So configure, you can add more. So I am going to add the next one and the next one. So either of the 3 URIs would be able to help with the authentication. Now click on save. The next thing we need to do is click on API permissions and add the CRM API to it. So click on add a permission, select Dynamics CRM and select the permission and add permissions. That's it. Come to certificates and secrets. Go ahead and create a new secret. Okay, and this time I will copy the value for the certificate and I add it here. And that's pretty much it with the app registration. Your app is ready and can be used in the custom connector. Now go to the Power Portal page, click on custom connectors, click on new connector and create from blank. I'm going to give the name demo custom connector, continue, and it asks for the host. So I'm going to give the organization that I want to connect to. So suppose if I want to connect to this particular organization right here, there you go. It already is based out of HTTPS scheme. You click on security. In the no authentication says select auth 2.0 and then Azure Active Directory. It asks you for a client ID and a secret. So I can quickly call the application ID here, the secret, the resource URI is going to be the organization ID. So, and now we come to definition. I add a new action. I give name as say get enabled users. You import from the sample. This is where you tell what is the API call look like. So say in my case, I want to use this guy right here. So I specify the parameter. When you click on import, what it does is that it kinds of get the API request URL and it identifies that saved query is a parameter which the user needs to enter. Once you have done that, click on create connector, and this is how easy you can set up a custom connector. Once we are done with custom connector creation, the next step would be to test whether or not the custom connector works fine. So now it's done and I'm going to click on test, click on new connection here. And now I'm going to authenticate using my AD. It asks me to consent on behalf of the organization. And that's it. So if I go ahead and refresh, this is my connection. Now it asks me to pass on a saved query ID that I want. So in my case, I'm going to provide the saved query ID. And when I click on test operation, I'm able to actually get the data of all the enabled user in the given organization. Now, once your custom connector is created, you can come back to your flow. So my custom connector name was demo Dataverse. So I'm going to call that. Get enabled user was the one that I have specified. And it asked me for the saved query ID. And now if I go ahead and click on test, we will be able to call the Dataverse API via the custom connector. There you go. So to conclude, there are many ways via which you can actually extend the functionality of the out-of-box connector that Microsoft provides. You can use invoke an HTTP request, you can use custom connectors in order to connect to your Dataverse APIs, and follow the REST API documentation in order to implement the functionality that you need. With this, I'm going to wind up today's session. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good day.